I can actually speak to this from personal experience. So you mentioned my work with the Lakeview Chamber of Commerce. I was actually the executive director for 13 years, and we received a community block grant through the city of Chicago. It's a pass-through program. And I will say that the funding declined year over year. So we received the grant every single year, but it would decline year over year just because the funding was drying up from the Fed, as it says in what you just read. I would also argue that the grant was worthwhile, but not substantial enough to make a measurable impact in our community. So we would use it for like business attraction and retention initiatives, some workforce development, some local promotion, tourism. But it was never really enough to make a huge difference. But we were a small organization, and so if we didn't receive the grant or get that funding, it would impact us financially. So I think the city of Chicago from the Fed received a few $1,000,000 in this grant program, but it would be spread out over 77 community areas. So the average grant was about $30,000 for the whole year, which is not a lot of money. So I think it's very interesting, and what the brief states is that whether or not the block grants are worthwhile. I think they can be worthwhile, but it needs to be rethought of how they're distributed and how the money is actually being used, how the funds are being
and how
used.
It's evaluated.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, we could. Yeah, it's a worthwhile program, but it definitely needs reform.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It also comes to question, the idea of the federal government being involved at that level of funding of small communities, right? And then might be the United States is built on this principle of local power and control.
Right.
In this case, I mean, that's the idea of the block grant. They're not telling you what to do, and the states decides how to distribute it. But again, it opens the door to corruption and giving the grant to people who are, to groups that are favored. So there's real criteria for it.
Yeah, well, the corruption piece is interesting as well, because there's room for corruption everywhere, obviously, right? But what's interesting aside from that is that if you're a small local chamber of commerce and you're receiving this money from the city of Chicago and it's just enough to plug a hole in your budget, then you're beholden to the city, or beholden to the funder, correct? And so it makes it more difficult to push back against things that may not benefit your community necessarily. So there's some local politics involved in that.
That's
so
the other side.
So it's interesting.
It is really a dilemma.